And we are back with more News Talks, Saga 960. So very glad you could join us on this edition of the Mark Bertrand Show. Well, it appears that somebody's lying, right? Because you've got Public Services Minister Marco Mendicino claiming that he got advice from police leading up the decision to impose the Emergencies Act, basically martial law, for lack of a better word, to deal with the convoy. They perceive this to be such a grave threat that something had to be done in order to protect Canadians from the convoy. I mean, remember, they had also created and perpetuated this ridiculous narrative that this was some kind of Russian-backed insurgency, Russian money, maybe white supremacists, Nazis. Don't forget arsonists and rapists, right? They pushed all these ridiculous stories, conspiracy theories in the mainstream media that this was somehow some kind of grave threat, that the government was in big trouble, that potentially they faced an insurgency. Well, a lot of that ended up being an absolute lie. But right now, as we're looking at the reasons that led up to it, the pretext being used for the government's imposition of what I would suggest is just basically martial law. Well, Mendicino said they were taking advice from law enforcement agencies and that the RCMP may very well have been involved in the advice taken in order to justify the imposition of martial law, the Emergencies Act. But now we have Brenda Lucki, the commissioner of the RCMP, testifying, well, no, we didn't advise the government to impose the Emergencies Act. It's not up to us to do it. Now, this is a little different because normally we see an RCMP commissioner that has been in lockstep with whatever Justin Trudeau says and does. In fact, they have run interference for this regime repeatedly. They failed to act when they were thinking about laying fraud charges in the Aga Khan matter, suggesting later on that it was against the public interest to do so. And later on, of course, there was the investigation over SNC Lavalin and the fact that they had smoking gun evidence suggesting there was obstruction of justice by Trudeau and by some of his little colleagues, his little cabal. Well, nothing came out of that. But now it seems that maybe this is a bridge too far for Brenda Lucki. So let's bring on Leo Knight, our friend, former RCMP officer, to weigh in on this. Welcome to the show, Leo.
Thank you very much, Mark.
All right. So what do you make of this? It's come up in question period where some are suggesting that the government really had no business imposing the Emergencies Act. There was no reason for it. Let's listen to this exchange.
Bridge and Coots, Alberta crossings were cleared before the Emergency Act was invoked. The act was not needed to clear the border blockades. Police were well equipped to take care of this with all of their existing laws and powers. So what then was the national security threat that met the extraordinarily high threshold needed to invoke this act? Is there something they're not telling us, or was the Prime Minister trying to cover up for his incompetent management of the protest?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
When illegal blockades hurt workers and endangered public safety, police were clear that they needed tools not held by any federal, provincial, or territorial law. It was only after we got advice from law enforcement that we invoked the Emergencies Act.
Is that true? Well, maybe not. I don't know what's going on here, because now we've got word that Brenda Lucki says, well, we didn't tell the government to impose martial law, Leo.
Yeah, there's some different aspects to this in terms of the way we look at it, Mark. On the surface of things, it would seem that the commissioner of the RCMP, contravened what the Prime Minister said in the House. That's a significant issue in and of itself. The commissioner did state in her Commons testimony that there had been meetings in the week leading up to the imposition of the Emergencies Act, and a number of issues were discussed. But she also said that police did not advise the government to invoke the Emergencies Act, a very significant departure, it would seem, from what the Prime Minister said in the House.
So is this he said, she said kind of thing? First of all,
no. Well, I mean, there's many other people at the table.
They can't both be telling the truth.
That's true, but there were many other people at the table during these meetings. I suspect Brenda Lucki is correct. I also suspect that the part of the problem in all of this was that the Ottawa police chief at the time, Peter Slowly, was in way over his head. He had no idea what to do. The OPP and the RCMP were involved in these meetings largely, I suspect, because the Ottawa police were in it way over their head. And by that, I mean the then chief of the Ottawa police, Peter Slowly. He had no clue what to do.
Is it possible that they could be talking about some other police force here? I mean, is it possible that then now Medici, the Prime Minister, can come out and say, well, yeah, maybe it wasn't the RCMP who asked us to impose the Emergency Act. It was the Ottawa police. Does that hold water for you?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, God knows politicians can find ways to lie, and they cover it up and they point out to different layers of things. My suspicion at this point is that the Prime Minister will try and say, refers to the police as a generic, not the RCMP specifically. And he may well get away with that lie, in as much as, according to Lucky's own testimony, there were meetings for at least a week prior to the Emergencies Act being imposed. So, I mean, during those meetings, undoubtedly a lot of different potential solutions and police actions were discussed. I have no doubt about that. Will the Prime Minister and the Minister point to those meetings and say, well, somebody said it during that meeting? Well, I'm sure that's probably true. Somebody did say it. But, at the end of the day, when they're trying to make a decision, what did the police advise the Prime Minister and the minister involved? And it sounds like, according to Lucky's testimony, that the police, generically, quote unquote, did not advise the Prime Minister to invoke the Emergencies Act.
Yeah, and she's pretty explicit about that. Commissioner Lucky, no, there was never question of requesting the Emergencies Act. Senator White, so you never asked for it? Do you know of any other police leadership that specifically asked the government for the invocation? Brenda Lucky, no. So here it is. Somebody who's been carrying water for the regime now since they got into power.
Well, Lucky said,
yeah. What's going on here? Has Brenda gone rogue?
It's interesting because, I mean, you have the statements from Peter Slowly saying that the Ottawa police couldn't do anything, which to me is absolute nonsense. In existing law, there were a number of solutions available to the Ottawa police right out of the gate. They chose not to use them and go a different path. Why? I don't know. But Lucky also said she believed in her own mind that there were ways to end the protest that did not involve the Emergencies Act. And I think that's a pretty telling statement, where you've got the Ottawa police going, we don't know what to do, help us. And the RCMP saying, well, there are ways to deal with this. So you've got slightly contradictory versions there. But I think at the end of the day, none of it backs up the Prime Minister's statement in the House.
Does it make sense that a municipal police force would ask the government to impose the Emergencies Act? I mean, you would expect the RCMP.
I can't imagine that, Mark. I mean, under the most egregious circumstances, perhaps they might, but I don't understand that. It seems, and let's get down into the minutia of this just a little bit, Mark, if we can. For a moment, it seems that the Ottawa police were stymied by the fact that they couldn't get, or none of the companies in the area of Ottawa with the big tow trucks to handle big rigs would respond to their calls to come out and get in the middle of this. And I'm sure those business owners considered it and said, yeah, I don't want to be the meat in this sandwich. And that's fair enough. But if the RCMP the Ottawa police were intent on towing those vehicles away and ending the blockade, all they needed to do was bring big rigs down from CFB Petawawa 2 hours to the north, because the Army base there has tow trucks to deal with their own big rigs, plus their own really heavy vehicles such as armored personnel carriers, tanks, etc., when they break down. So all he needed to do was get the prime minister or the minister involved to retask the CFB equipment, and they could have easily solved that problem. But they didn't do that. They chose not to. The prime minister chose to invoke the Emergencies Act, and I think it was an incredible overstepping of his power and authority, and certainly it trampled all over the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
And it sounds to me, it looks on the face of this that Brenda Lucki doesn't want to wear this one because she's taking an incredible amount of heat. She has been mocked. She has been discredited widely over her failure to act on a number of cases where the prime minister was seen as having potentially committed a crime, the most serious of which was obstruction of justice. So she wore those, right? Her credibility has taken a serious hit as somebody who's supposed to be a law enforcement person who respects the law. And then it comes out that she didn't think that fraud charges were appropriate in the Aga Khan matter because it might be something that would run against the public interest. So she's taken enormous amounts of heat here. It just seems to me that this is maybe a bridge too far, that she finally says, you know what? No, not this time. This time, I'm not going to wear it for you guys. What do you think? Is that possible here?
Well, it's hard to get inside her head on this. I suppose it's possible, Mark. There's no question she's been taking it in the ear, if you will, over the lack of action by the RCMP in a number of matters involving the Prime Minister, such as the Aga Khan, such as SNC-Lavalin, to name but two. But the RCMP, the commissioner of the RCMP, typically, traditionally, historically, is to be apolitical and remains, I don't want to say or use the wrong word, but I'll use the word aloof, for lack of a better description, to whatever the arguments are going on the ground. So if you've got two sides of the argument, i.e. politicians, the opposition and the government, fighting over a position, traditionally the RCMP would stay above the fray. And was Brenda doing that, throughout those particular instances that you mentioned? Yeah, no. I mean, she can be criticized, for the positions that the RCMP has taken, and rightly so, and she should be. Is she pushing back at this point in her testimony yesterday in front of the Commons Committee? I think it's fair to say that she was being truthful in her responses. I think when I read the transcripts of her testimony, I see somebody, a senior police executive, who is trying to find a way not to throw the boss under the bus while at the same time telling the truth to the Commons Committee.
All right, Leo. Thank you so much for coming on this segment. I really do appreciate that. Great having a guy with your expertise on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Check out primetimecrime.com, Leo's terrific website. Got to take a brief commercial break. Back with more on News Talk Saga 960 and the Mark Petronis Show after this.